Good morning, y'all. I need to talk to you today about something that is more serious than almost anything else I have covered on this channel in recent months. And I want to say that plainly, without exaggeration and without drama, because the situation deserves honesty rather than hype. The Caribbean basin has been shaking, not in the gentle, routine way that a seismically active region always shakes. The Caribbean records thousands of small earthquakes every single year, and most of them are never felt and never reported beyond the seismological monitoring networks that track them. I'm not talking about that background seismicity. I'm talking about a seismic sequence that began in late June and that has produced one of the most devastating earthquake events in the Western Hemisphere in years. An event that has killed nearly 3,000 people, injured more than 16,000, left tens of thousands more in homes that are structurally in danger of collapse, and that has generated an aftershock sequence across the broader Caribbean basin that is still producing significant shaking as you watch this video. And I think every person in the Caribbean and Gulf region deserves to understand what happened, why it happened, and what the ongoing seismic situation across this part of the world means for the weeks and months ahead. Let me start with the event that changed everything. The Venezuela doublet. What happened? On June 24th, 2026, the Caribbean basin experienced one of the most unusual and devastating seismic events in its modern recorded history. A doublet earthquake. Not a single main shock. Not a main shock followed by smaller aftershocks. Two major earthquakes, occurring within minutes of each other, originating from nearby but distinct fault structures, each capable of producing catastrophic damage on its own, arriving in rapid succession before any meaningful emergency response to the first could be mounted. The sequence began at approximately 6:04 p.m. Eastern Time when a magnitude 7. That earthquake struck the northeastern coast of Venezuela, near the coastal state of La Guaira, north of Caracas. For anyone who has spent time in Venezuela or has family there, La Guaira is the coastal corridor that connects Caracas to the sea, a densely populated, topographically challenging area where the Andes Mountains plunge steeply toward the Caribbean coast, and where the building stock in many neighborhoods reflects decades of informal construction that was never engineered to withstand major seismic loading. The 7.2 struck that population with full force. Buildings that had already absorbed damage from previous seismic events in this seismically active region could not absorb more. Structures failed, people were inside them, and then within minutes, before the dust from the first earthquake had settled, a magnitude 7. 5 main shocks struck. The USGS confirmed that these two events, the 7.2 foreshock and the 7. 5 main shock, originated from nearby but seismologically distinct sources, likely two separate structures within the broader plate boundary fault system that runs across northern Venezuela. The seismological term for this kind of pairing is a doublet earthquake. Two major earthquakes that are causally linked, where the first rupture triggered or accelerated the second, but where each event involved its own distinct fault rupture. The 7. 5 was the strongest earthquake to strike Venezuela since the great San Narciso earthquake of 1900, a magnitude threshold that the region had not seen in 126 years. The damage across Caracas and La Guaira was catastrophic. Buildings collapsed across the capital. Rescue workers and ordinary citizens began digging through rubble by hand in the hours after the shaking stopped. The Venezuelan government initially reported a death toll of 235 with 4,300 injured. But those numbers, heartbreaking as they were not the final picture. By July 4th, the confirmed death toll had risen to 2,954 with 16,292 people injured. The USGS pager system, the Prompt Assessment of Global Earthquakes for Response tool that uses building inventory data and population exposure models to estimate casualties, predicted the final toll could potentially exceed $10,000 as search and rescue operations continued in the rubble of collapsed structures. More than 28,000 Venezuelan families were confirmed to be living in homes assessed as being in danger of structural collapse. The scale of human suffering in this event is difficult to fully comprehend. The fault system, understanding why this happened here. Y'all, I want to spend a moment on the geology, because understanding why this earthquake happened where it happened is essential to understanding the broader Caribbean seismic picture and what it means for the shaking that has continued across the region in the weeks since. Northern Venezuela does not sit on a single, clearly defined fault line. It sits within what geologists describe as a broad transpressional boundary zone between the Caribbean plate and the South American plate. That boundary, where two of the major tectonic plates of the Western Hemisphere are grinding past and into each other simultaneously, expresses itself through a complex system of interrelated faults that extends for more than 300 kilometers from the Venezuelan Andes all the way eastward to the island of Trinidad. The principal structures in this system are the Volcanoes fault, the San Sebastian fault, and the El Pilar fault, which together accommodate most of the lateral motion between the Caribbean and South American plates at a rate of approximately 10 millimeters per year. Each millimeter of motion that does not release in small, frequent earthquakes is stress that accumulates on the fault system and waits for a larger event to release it. The June 24th doublet earthquake released an enormous amount of that accumulated stress. But seismologists are clear that a major earthquake on one part of a fault system does not eliminate the stress on the broader system. It can redistribute it. It can bring adjacent fault segments closer to failure. The aftershock sequence from the June 24th events has been substantial. The Volcano Discovery Network recorded the strongest shaking in the Caribbean Sea in the past month at a 7.5, and the broader aftershock pattern has been producing earthquakes felt across Trinidad, Tobago, Barbados, and as far as the eastern Lesser Antilles in the days and weeks since the main shock. The broader Caribbean seismic picture, more shaking across the region. The Venezuelan doublet is the dominant event in the current Caribbean seismic story, but it is not the only one. The broader basin has been showing elevated seismic activity across multiple fault systems in the weeks surrounding the Venezuela event, and I want to make sure the communities across the Caribbean island chain understand the full picture of what the monitoring networks are recording. In May 2026, a magnitude 6.0 earthquake struck the North Atlantic, approximately 68 kilometers northeast of St. John's, Antigua and Barbuda. That event was the strongest in the Eastern Caribbean in the prior year and was widely felt across the Leeward Islands. In the same month, a magnitude 4.0 event struck the Caribbean Sea near St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In June, a magnitude 5.0 earthquake struck near Boca de Yuma in the La Altagracia province of the Dominican Republic, an area located directly over the Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault Zone, the same fault system that produced the catastrophic 2010 Haiti earthquake and the 2021 Southern Haiti earthquake. And on June 6, 2026, a magnitude 6. One earthquake struck approximately 104 kilometers west-northwest of Mantua, Cuba, a significant event in western Cuba that was felt across much of the western Caribbean and as far as southern Florida. Y'all, when you map these events, the 6, 1 near Cuba, the 5, 0 in the Dominican Republic, the 6, 0 near Antigua, and the 7, 2 and 7. 5 doublet in Venezuela. You are looking at seismic activity spanning essentially the entire Caribbean plate boundary system within the span of 2 to 3 months. That does not mean these events are causally linked. In a region that produces, on average, about 3, 7 magnitude, 6 or greater earthquakes per year in the Caribbean Sea alone, and where the broader regional system generates roughly 4,800 magnitude 3 or greater events annually, this level of activity across the basin may fall within the range of normal elevated seismicity rather than representing something anomalous. But it does serve as a powerful reminder that the entire Caribbean plate boundary system is active, that stress is being accommodated across multiple fault structures simultaneously, and that the communities living on and near these faults are in a region where the potential for significant seismic events is not a theoretical future possibility. It is an ongoing present reality. The human crisis. In Venezuela, and why the response has been complicated. I want to spend a moment talking about what is happening on the ground in Venezuela right now, because this is a humanitarian crisis of major proportions, and I think it deserves to be acknowledged clearly and compassionately as part of this broadcast. The death toll from the June 24th doublet, now confirmed at nearly 3,000 with thousands more injured and tens of thousands in structurally compromised homes, has been compounded by significant challenges in the emergency response. International journalists and humanitarian organizations reported that Venezuelan government forces were at various points blocking or impeding international rescue teams from entering the affected areas. The International Rescue Committee stated publicly that the response was not adequate given the scale of destruction. Cynthia Arnson, an international relations analyst at Johns Hopkins University, noted that the earthquakes had exposed the government's inability to provide basic needs and handle the aftermath. At the same time, the Venezuelan diaspora around the world, in the United States, Colombia, Spain, and elsewhere, mobilized rapidly to send supplies and support to their families and communities. Puerto Rican singer Bad Bunny arranged for humanitarian aid to be delivered to Venezuela, arriving on July 3rd. The human solidarity in the face of this disaster has been remarkable, even as the institutional response has been complicated by the political circumstances in the country. More than 28,000 families are in homes that structural assessments have identified as being at risk of collapse. Those families need to be relocated before the next significant aftershock puts them in mortal danger. Whether that relocation is happening at the necessary scale and pace is a question that deserves continued attention from the international community. What this means for preparedness across the Caribbean. Y'all, let me close with what I think are the most important practical takeaways from everything I have described this morning, because this story is not just about Venezuela, and it is not just about the past 2 weeks. It is about the entire Caribbean basin. and about what the people who live in it should understand about the seismic environment they inhabit. Every island and coastal community in the Caribbean sits within or adjacent to a plate boundary system that is geologically capable of producing major to great earthquakes. The Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault System running through Haiti and the Dominican Republic produced a magnitude 7 earthquake in 2010 that killed over 200,000 people. The same fault system produced another major earthquake in 2021. It is still loaded with stress. The Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean, running along the northern edge of the Caribbean plate, is capable of generating a subduction zone earthquake and tsunami that NOAA has identified as the most significant tsunami hazard source for the eastern United States. The Lesser Antilles subduction zone along the eastern arc of Caribbean islands is an active subduction zone with associated volcanic hazards from Saba through Grenada. These hazards are not new. They are not worsening in the way that climate-driven weather hazards are worsening. They are simply the geological reality of one of the most tectonically active regions on Earth. And the communities that survive major seismic events best are invariably the communities that prepared before the shaking started rather than after. If you live in the Caribbean, know whether your home is in a liquefaction-prone area, a landslide-prone area, or a coastal zone that would be vulnerable to tsunami inundation following an offshore earthquake. Know the difference between an earthquake watch, an earthquake advisory, and a tsunami warning, and know what action each requires. Have an emergency kit with water, food, medications, and important documents accessible in a location that you can reach even if interior areas of your home are blocked. Know your building's construction type and whether it was built to any seismic code. And perhaps most importantly, know your evacuation route to high ground in the event of a tsunami warning, and know how to reach that high ground in the 30 minutes or less that a near-field tsunami event might give you. The Caribbean is one of the most beautiful places on Earth. It is also one of the most geologically active. Those two things are both true simultaneously, and the people who live there deserve to have that truth communicated to them clearly and respectfully, rather than something to be filed away and forgotten between major events. Closing, y'all, the Caribbean Basin has been through an extraordinary seismic sequence over the past several weeks. A devastating earthquake doublet in Venezuela has killed nearly 3,000 people and left tens of thousands more in structural danger. Significant events have occurred near Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Antigua, and across the eastern Caribbean. The aftershock sequence continues, and the broader plate boundary system remains active across its full geographic extent. I'm going to keep watching the seismic monitoring networks across the Caribbean, and I will be back in front of you the moment anything develops that the communities in this region need to know about. Share this video with your family and friends in the Caribbean, because the seismic story in this region is ongoing, and the people who live there deserve a clear, honest, science-grounded account of what their ground is doing beneath their feet. Stay informed, stay prepared, and as always, stay safe out there. I love y'all.